New bombshell testimony in the impeachment probe out tonight. A key Trump ally telling Congress, listen closely, there was a bribery plot. And also telling Congress there was a bribery quid pro quo. And also telling Congress U.S. funds, taxpayer dollars, were withheld from Ukraine to get the political investigation that Donald Trump wanted. Let me stop right here. If you're thinking this sounds like a turning point, it is. And that's as much about the who as the what, because this damning breaking news bombshell testimony against Trump that I'm telling you about is coming tonight from a Trump loyalist, or at least he was a loyalist in the eyes of everyone at the White House until today. Trump Ambassador Gordon Sondland. He is a Trump donor who has been defending Donald Trump and echoing Trump's denials even after the impeachment probe launched. Now, Sondland rattling Trump world, striking at the heart of Trump's impeachment defense, and that's not all. This is a very simple and damning development for Trump tonight, and I'm about to show you a few simple highlights from the new testimony. But before we even do that, here is the incriminating context, and this is something anybody can understand, even someone with an open mind about whether or not Trump did a bribery plot. Mr. Sondland is not just pointing a finger at the White House right now. He's doing so in the guiltiest possible way by walking back and revising his past testimony that was initially more friendly to Trump. Democratic investigators already saying this shows a consciousness of a cover-up because Sondland is changing or reversing the past testimony that was defending Trump, where he played down why the crucial money for Ukraine was ever frozen, something that, as we reported at the time, was contradicted by other insiders. Democrats pressing Sondland on potential perjury for those very claims. Perjury to Congress is no joke. Today, another Trump aide, right now, Roger Stone, is starting his own criminal trial for the same thing, for lying to Congress. So how does a diplomat change his story under these conditions? By suddenly remembering and recalling things. In this new testimony out for the first time today, Sondland says some version of "I now recall" 8 different times in order to change the story about the core of this impeachment case, saying he now recalls bribery. And he now recalls the plotting and the scheming and the detailed financial pressure put on Ukraine in the bribery plot. So that's the context. Now to a few simple highlights for you, brand new. Sondland testifying he told Ukraine they would get no U.S. aid without the investigations that Trump wanted. Okay, right there. That is Trump's point person confirming the way Trump sought this bribe. He wanted something from Ukraine, the Biden probe. And he wasn't giving them that U.S. aid unless they bribed Trump with the probe to help his reelection. So that's Trump's current ambassador laying these details out under oath. And not only was this Ukraine money held back, but the Trump folks wanted this whole investigative storm they were cooking up to hit Joe Biden in public and box Ukraine into the plans. Sondland now telling Congress, Trump, quote, he wanted it public. Okay. 2 more simple things. When asked what he thought about asking Ukraine to investigate the Bidens, this whole bribery plot that Sondland was working on, he now testifies he thought it was, quote, improper, and he assumed it was illegal. That is not good. That is all new tonight. Now, Sondland also revealed new details of a key call that he had with Trump in September in the midst of all this and those text messages. So we're getting this as new. He says Trump was in a very bad mood, and it was a very quick conversation. Sondland asking him, what do you want from Ukraine? And Trump replies, according to Sondland, I want nothing. I want no quid pro quo. I want Zelensky, the Ukraine leader, to do, quote, the right thing, Sondland says. And then Sondland, who is the point person here, asked the president to clarify what that means. And Trump adds, according to Sondland, quote, I want him to do what he ran on, and then it was almost like he hung up on me, Sondland says, how quickly that call ended. Everything I just reported to you is new. This is the core of the bribery quid pro quo case against President Trump. Now it has new details on the bone, and it's coming in under oath. And this case I'm reporting to you against Trump was just delivered to the impeachment probe by someone who, as of tonight, still works for President Trump. I turn now to former federal prosecutor Joyce Vance and John Flannery, as well as Emily Bazelon from the New York Times Magazine. Good evening to all of you.
Good evening.
John.
Hi, Ari.
Hi. John, this sounds like very damning testimony from maybe one of the worst people with the closest hands and action on the bribery plot for the Trump White House.
Right, it does. It's an important piece of corroboration for the others that it seemed to me come forward unblemished and talk in full voice about what happened. I have the feeling from this that reading his statement that he's still a reluctant declarant, if you will. You know, he has to be. In his statement, he says he had his recollection refreshed and so forth. But he comes to the table and he makes very dramatic statements nonetheless. He admits to the quid pro quo. He admits to a conversation that he had with the president in October before he testified, although he minimizes what the content of that was. But the most significant thing is going to the question, we all say quid pro quo, the bribe. The exchange for the president's need to have something happen while he withholds the money that is necessary to the defense.
This, John, is where we've seen a lot of movement back and forth. But this is the very simple part. Trump says, give me the attack and probe on Biden, and I'll give you the money. And if you don't, I won't give you the money. And so returning to the shortest quote in all this that I mentioned in the lead, John, I told Ukraine, no U.S. aid without the investigation Trump wanted.
Right. Well, and you have the text messages that corroborate what he's saying now, which suggests that the statement was going to be dependent upon, the statement was going to determine what we would do. And I think they were rightly anxious in Ukraine that they would make the statement and then Trump would walk away from his promise and he would have it both ways and he would, for Russia, expose Ukraine to the possible danger without the funds to defend itself for the Javelin missiles and other things.
So, Joyce, is this an admission of the bribery plot?
You know, I don't think that congressional investigators had to have Ambassador Sondland's testimony to make the bribery case. It's very clear from a number of witnesses. But what this does is it deprives the president of the one witness that he was relying on to counteract all of those witnesses who had come forward, Ambassador Taylor, Ambassador Yovanovitch. And this is pretty spectacular, the way it happened, because we know now that what happened with Sondland was he blinked. He got right up to the moment where his testimony was going to be released. He realized he had perjured himself. He walked it back. Everyone can understand what happens here. This is as easy to comprehend as the bribery charges themselves are.
Yeah, Joyce, you're hitting on that other point, which is, as I mentioned, a real thing. Roger Stone, in fairness to him, was not ultimately charged with an election conspiracy or colluding with the Russians. But federal prosecutors viewed his lies to Congress as enough, among other things, to bring him into court with a trial that starts today and we're going to get to later in the hour. Your view, then, is that Sondland, who's relatively new to all this and who was being very loyal and spinning for Trump as recently as the past few weeks, saw that others had contradicted him in a way that he, you think, was worried about perjury?
Yeah.
He has to have been worried about perjury. That's what's written all over this statement. You know, I think this "I can now recall" is the new version of "I don't remember" that we've seen so many witnesses use during the Mueller investigation and in other settings. He had to recall. He told investigators what he knew they already knew in order to save himself.
Emily, let me read to you some other parts that I haven't gotten to yet that are also new, obviously. We got a lot of new information here, where he talks about the role that Giuliani played. That Giuliani proposed language, quote, negotiating a public statement to get that Biden probe, the Burisma 2016, and that language was, quote, being proposed by Giuliani. Emily, how important is this that they're not only getting different people appearing to admit this, but really showing everyone in real time who was writing what? And that Giuliani, we've heard the shadow foreign policy a lot. He also apparently is ghostwriting announcements from Ukraine.
Right. So you see Giuliani in the middle of this, and Sondland, who is supposed to be our ambassador to the European Union, is the kind of in-between middleman between the irregular shadow diplomacy channel that Giuliani is operating on and then our State Department, our regular government. He's in this kind of bridge position, and this is a guy who made his money operating hotels. He was a Trump donor. He didn't have diplomatic experience, and he was in a very tricky role, which is now proving to be quite precarious.
Yeah. Here's how a top Republican, Mark Meadows, views it, saying, look, even with everything that's come out, Giuliani's role is fine. Take a look.
Rudy Giuliani had a critical task of defending the president of the United States against allegations, some of those that have a Ukrainian nexus. His role as a private attorney to defend the president against some of the 2016 election interference allegations, both for and against, are certainly something that a private attorney should do.
John?
Well, that's a fantasy land statement, if you ever heard one, particularly given everything we know. And one of the interesting things about Sondland doing this is he was the defense that Trump himself chose. The text message in which he says, the president reported to me no quid pro quo. And then that's all now evaporated. And here we have him testifying to the quid pro quo in that brief amended statement.
Let's dig on that, John, because do you find that in and of itself suspicious? I mean, just watching this, I'm pretty fascinated because this is Trump's guy, and he's now dishing on the call. That call was supposed to, in Trump's mind, apparently remain secret. And he's giving what sounds like a criminal defense. It doesn't sound like they're even doing diplomacy and talking about plans, whoever may be carrying them out. It's like he's calling him and saying, no, it wasn't vehicular manslaughter. And you're like, I'm sorry, I thought we were talking about the directions. I mean, there's something very suspicious just about the way that Trump speaks to Sondland. And he is now saying to the impeachment investigators, look, I tried to get a straight answer, and what I got was this no bribery defense, which isn't really typically how presidents talk about achieving lawful foreign policy goals.
Well, I get the feeling from even the updated version that what that conversation was. Well, you just tell him that there's no quid pro quo. And he knew better than that when he communicated that back, he being Sondland. And everything else that he said tells us he had to know about it. And, the question about what did he recall and when, his statement is, I had my recollection refreshed, which I think is an effort to avoid the perjury of the nature that would come under the federal statute that doesn't really allow you to recant very easily. There's a second section, 1623, that allows you to do that. But this particular section he would come under required some sort of gymnastics, and he did that. But, we still have problems about the July 10th meeting, what he said and knew and what really happened, and there are witnesses who contradict him. So I think he's put himself in a precarious position. And I originally said, when they were talking about the witnesses, that I couldn't imagine putting Sondland in that position, given the messages we already had from him. But I think he's made himself useless to Trump as a witness in the trial in the Senate.
Emily, let me bring in Emily, your view on that.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a big problem going forward for President Trump. You're going to see people continuing to defend him. There is an increasing gap between Trump's claims that this phone call was perfect, that there's nothing wrong, and then the kind of illusions, the sort of shadowy way in which Sondland and others are reporting that Trump is talking, as if he doesn't quite want to say what's going on, a kind of wink, wink, nod, nod. And that gap is going to be an increasing issue for the president and for his defenders.
And Joyce, finally, I have one more quote. We try to go through it, and they're all pretty simple tonight. But this is Sondland also explaining the intricacy of what they wanted Giuliani to get out of Ukraine. The public statement about these Biden probes would need to come, they said, directly from Zelensky, but it might have been written by Giuliani himself, Joyce.
So this is absolutely incredible. This notion that Rudy Giuliani would write a statement for the president of a foreign country.
Right.
They've abandoned any pretense here that what they're concerned about is corruption in Ukraine. This was always about, it is about getting some sort of a benefit for the president in the upcoming presidential campaign. That's the only thing that's going on here.
Yeah, and the level of detail, it is really striking the level of detail in this new, as to quote John Flannery, this refreshed testimony. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.